Alrighty. So welcome to the first Flutter Toronto meetup. You are all here for our very first one, which is unfortunately online. We had planned this meetup many months ago, right as COVID was kind of starting, and we just kept delaying it, hoping that we could do it in person because I really was hoping to do some in-person events and get to meet people and stuff like that. But we're still going to do that. It just might be another few months away. So we, instead of delaying it further, we decided, let's get at least one meetup behind us and we can always do more in the future. So I'm really happy that you guys are all here, and I'm hoping that I can meet you all in person as well later on. So for our agenda today, Alvin is going to be doing a talk, and then I'm going to be doing a talk. Alvin, do you want to just do a quick intro for what your talk's going to cover?
Yeah, for sure. My name is Alvin Fong. I'm an engineering manager at TripleScale. And today I'll be talking about how to set up a CI/CD pipeline with Bitrise.
Perfect. And yeah, I'm Jason Rye, and I'm one of the technical leads at Mobx, and I've been working with Flutter for the last 2 years or so. And after we finish those talks, if there's anybody else who'd kind of like to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about what they're doing with Flutter and what they're doing in general, they're more than welcome to. And if we have time after that, we can chat about some other kind of discussion ideas that we've thought of. So without further ado, Alvin, over to you.
All right. Okay, let's set up the presenting thing here. Okay. So first, why are we doing this? You guys probably all know CI/CD is a pretty integral part of our work. We want to know that whenever we check in code, whenever we create a PR, we want that code to be working. So CI/CD is one of our most powerful tools to do that. Today, I'll be working through a sample project and setting up the most basic Bitrise pipeline to do this. So I went into Flutter samples and just forked this repo. This one's veggie seasons. It tells you what vegetables are in season. So I cloned this and made my own repo. I'm actually gonna present my whole screen. It's probably gonna be easier this way. Okay. All right. So hopefully everyone can see my Android Studio up here. And my GitHub.
We're seeing the Meet video screen right now.
Okay, that's probably the wrong screen. Let me try screen number 2. Okay. How's that looking?
Looking good.
Okay, great. Okay. So first of all, when I checked out this folder, when I checked out this project, Android was actually missing from it. It kind of blows my mind that every other platform was there, iOS, web, but Android was missing. So I used the command flutter create dot right here, and that auto generated the whole Android file here. So let's first talk about the local signing configuration, because we're probably going to be running this on our local device. Let me find build.gradle in here. Open up this one here. And this is how we separated the signing config into release and debug. On the debug here, it's all locally based. I create a key store properties file because we do not check in our key store properties into Git, so everything's a local Git ignored file. So under the Android folder, I have debug.keystore, keystore.properties, and this defines all my passwords and alias. This is the standard auto-generated Android, so I'm totally okay with you guys stealing this data. All right. Okay. So, and also we need a generated release key store for Bitrise. So locally, these two files are going to be used, and on Bitrise, we'll use a completely different key store. Okay. So back to our build.gradle here. Here is the release, and Bitrise will use all this. Notice that they're environment variables rather than defining the file. Bitrise allows us to define secret environment keys that we'll be using later. Okay, so let's get right into it and add a new app on Bitrise. Okay, so I'm going to go to my dashboard and I'm going to create a new project. Add new app here. I'll be using the web UI today, but it's totally doable with command line too. Select the account that you want to use with. Privacy is always good. So it helps you connect your GitHub repository. I find it's easiest if you're admin on both the Bitrise side and the GitHub side. That way permissions are a lot more streamlined. Here's my sample project. Pick that. If you are admin on both, auto adding SSH is really easy. My branch here that I'm going to build is I'll tag Bitrise sample here, and I'm going to do that. Bitrise will now validate it, check out everything, make sure everything's connected. That should take about half a minute or so. That green OK is pretty good. Yeah. So it's making sure the SSH keys are added properly and then doing a test fetch. That should be done in 10 seconds or so. Okay. So once that completes, we'll set up the rest of the configuration. There it goes, validation complete. It initially asks you, do you want to run tests in your project? Let's say yes for now. If you say yes, though, it will ask you for some iOS Reading setup. If you don't have that set up right now, you could just say no. We'll confirm that. You have an option to do an app icon. And finally, webhooks, so that your PRs get that fancy green light when things are all ready to merge. Okay, and you guys can see that they've kicked up, Bitrise has kicked off our first build. Let's take a look at that. I know this will take about 2 minutes to run, so I won't bore everyone with watching it. So we can just take a look at what this workflow is actually doing. In the Bitrise UI here, we pop into the workflow. And then we see all the steps that have been added automatically. So what is it actually doing? So it spins up a build machine. It checks out your Git repository. By default, it includes a step to do nothing. It's just a hello world here. It installs Flutter on the build machine and static analysis, then runs your test. So notice how that aren't actually building anything at this point. We're missing Flutter build, so we'll have to add that here, right? And so we'll do a static analysis. We'll run our unit tests, and then we'll do Flutter build. Okay. Right now, there's a little bit of a bug with Bitrise here. It's using version 13, while it's reporting the latest version is 0.12. If you keep it on 0xx, it will just get the latest version of the step. Okay. Now, another thing to note is that this Flutter build doesn't actually provide our signing key store. So we also need to add that. So we'll upload our, let me save this workflow for now, and then we'll go into code signing here. So here you have your iOS code signing and your Android code signing. So from before, we had a release.key store, so let's upload that. Okay, my password here is literally just password, and my alias is secret alias. Hopefully your security is a lot better than this. Okay, we'll save that. Notice how these passwords are now available as environment variables. These variables are the exact same ones that build.gradle can access. Okay. So we've uploaded our key store to Bitrise, but our build machine still doesn't have it. So let's go into workflow. Right before we do Flutter build, we need to do a file downloader step. So what this does, it downloads the key store from Bitrise into our build machine. IO Android key store URL. Okay. Our download destination path, it can basically be anything as long as it matches what we have in build.gradle. We'll put that in. Okay. Making sure I don't have any typos here, that would be embarrassing. Okay, so that looks good. Okay, we're gonna save it and then we'll rerun. So here, our first build has already succeeded. So let's rebuild it. And when it rebuilds, it will use our new version of our workflow. So this will take about 10 minutes to run. The build machine will chug away for about 10 minutes, running our unit tests, and then putting our APKs together. So we will watch it, and I'll just ask you all to pretend that it just works. But on the other hand, I will show you what the expected result is. So being a good presenter, we always do a dry run of what we're gonna say before. So this is from my dry run. Okay. So at the very end of this, when everything's built and packaged together and we get a nice green light, let's see what we actually get. In here, we have release.apk, that there's a public install page. You can send this up to your QA or clients. Okay. So that's pretty much it for Android. As you can see, Flutter is really well integrated into Bitrise. Bitrise is extremely mobile first. So it took us roughly less than 10 minutes just to set up this basic pipeline. Okay, but now what about iOS? So it's definitely a fair bit more complicated to do than Android. But my rule of thumb is if you can build it with Xcode, it will almost certainly work on Bitrise. So what do you need to get started? You need your Apple developer account, whether that's enterprise or personal. And then you'll download the certificate from Apple, and also your professional profiles. So I have everything set up here, provisioning profile. Yeah, those of you who have never touched iOS before, it's probably best to get an iOS developer to help work with you through the step. But once you have it working in Xcode and you can run it from Xcode, just take those updated files and upload them to our GitHub here. In this commit here, I've added iOS setup and updates to package ID here. Basically, as you go through Xcode and you're doing all these citing capabilities, changing your certificates and profiles, everything's saved into this PBX project. That's the Xcode project. So you take this and just send it into your GitHub. Bitrise will just pick it up and build it the same way. A couple of things to note is that you do need to upload your certifications into your code signing. I should have an example of that here. Going to samples and then code signing under workflow. Yep. So here is my provisioning profile, and here's my code signing certificate. For those of you who are completely unfamiliar with signing iOS, you need your certificate to prove who you are. And you need a provisioning profile that ties together what app you're writing, who you are, and what test devices this app can be installed on. It's a little more close garden than Android, but it's not too difficult. Okay, so we've loaded everything. So let's go back to our workflow. And just like how we downloaded our key store onto our build machine, we also need to do the same thing for iOS. This step is called certificate and profile installer. You just needed to add the step. Everything's auto configured, but you need it here. Another step is this script. By default, Flutter build, when it builds for iOS, it comes up with this .app file. Now, .app cannot be installed on phones. You need a .ipa. So we need a quick script to kind of convert the two. And also move it into our upload folder. After which, deploy to Bitrise will handle the rest. Okay. So this is pretty much the end of my material. As you can see, it's really not that difficult to set up CI/CD for both Android and iOS. And I'll be happy to take any questions. Okay. Well, if anyone has questions down the road, feel free to reach out to me through Meetup or LinkedIn.
I have a quick one for you, Alvin. Do you have a write-up of these steps that you could distribute to the Meetup?
I almost have one. I have my script for today, and I can turn that into something kind of like a blog, and I'll put that up in maybe a day or two.
That would be great. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Awesome. Any other questions for Alvin? Alrighty. So I think it's time for me. Alvin, if you don't mind stopping sharing, then I can take over. Alrighty. So what I'm going to be talking about today is doing MVVM style app development in Flutter using the state management library called Mobx. I'm a huge fan of MVVM as a front-end architecture pattern, and I found that it's really, really well suited when paired with Mobx and works really great in Flutter. First, a quick background on me. So just so you kind of know where I'm coming from, I've started out doing native Android development, then transitioned into doing Xamarin and Xamarin Forms development for about 5 years. That's really where I learned about MVVM, as it's really popular in the Xamarin space. And then just for the last 2 years, I've been doing Flutter and Dart. And I didn't start out doing MVVM with Flutter and Dart, but over time, I've kind of gone back to my Xamarin roots and found that it is really a great architecture approach for building front-end applications. So quick, if you're not familiar with MVVM, I'm going to hit you with a Wikipedia definition before I kind of explain it myself. So it's an architectural pattern that facilitates the separation of the view, which is the graphical user interface, from the business logic and the backend or the model. And this way, the view is less dependent and less intertwined with the logic that you write. I think this is really important in Flutter because there's no separation of markup like HTML or JSX or XML with the code, the Dart code that you write. So it's very easy to just put everything in one file, to put everything in your build method and go from there. And I think that works okay for small apps and maybe even medium apps. But as your app grows more complex, I think it's challenging to kind of continue that pattern. So if you look at MVVM here as kind of a diagram, you know, you have your view, which is going to be composed of Flutter widgets, right? And then you have your view model, which is just pure Dart code that kind of presents to your view what type of data you want to display. And then your model is where, you know, you might be writing to the database, you might be writing to an API, you might have some validation, and that should just be pure Dart code as well. And so when you look at Flutter and Dart, really Flutter is the layout system and the UI system. And I think it's important to try to keep your business logic and some of your other code that isn't UI focused separate from Flutter and keep it as pure Dart. So I'm going to show you an example. Oh, sorry. So first, some benefits of MVVM. So classic separation of concerns. Stateful widgets and using set state everywhere can become very difficult to manage as your app grows more complex. And Flutter is a reactive framework, and I'm going to show you why I think that's really well suited for MVVM. So let's take a look at a code sample here. So this is a small project that I've been working on recently, and this is just using, you know, your classic stateful widget that holds state and set state. So the actual build method is omitted from the screenshot because it's not important, but I want to take a look at what's going on in this pretty simple homepage that, you know, as you kind of build and add on to this can become quite complex. So you can see that at the top of the file, we define a class or an object to interact with our API. We're doing API calls. You can see in the get data function that we're manipulating that data a little bit. We're looking for some specific items in the data that we get back and manipulating that. We're also transforming it into a different model. So that to me is business logic. You know, there's some rule that says that some of this data is valid and other of this data isn't. And then we're manipulating it into a different model to display in the UI. So I consider that business logic as well. Below where this screenshot would be, there'd be the build method, right? So you have layout in this file and UI. Back up at the top beside the API object, we have a page controller, which has nothing to do with the API, but they're both just things that I need ready to go on my homepage state. And calling set state in this widget would mean that the entire widget would rebuild, right? Set state rebuilds that entire widget. So performance can actually become an issue if you have a very complex UI. And there's ways to manage that. You'd have to break down a lot of portions of the homepage into their own widgets, but then you might have to pass a lot of data around. So again, I think for small to medium sized apps, going with this type of model will be fine. But as your app grows very, very complex, I find this hard to manage. So let's talk about some strategies and some ways to kind of resolve this. So Mobx is a state management library that's pretty popular in the Flutter ecosystem. And their mission statement is that Mobx is a state management library that makes it simple to connect reactive data to your, of your application with the UI. And I think reactive is really the key word there. This is just looking at the counter example when you create a new Flutter app, just so you have an example of what a Mobx kind of UI looks like. So on the left here, we have the standard counter example that you get when you create a new Flutter app. And on the right side is it modified to use Mobx. So what you'll notice is that instead of just using an integer that we're keeping manually in the stateful widget, we're using a counter object, and we're going to get into that a little bit more. And then the most important thing is instead of calling set state anywhere, around the text widget in the middle of the right file, we're wrapping it with a special widget called an observer. And we're going to learn about observers a little bit more in a few minutes, but that is what allows the UI to rebuild when your state changes. And again, we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but this simple example is already way more efficient with Mobx, because when that counter value changes, only the text widget is being re-rendered on the right example. Whereas on the left example, the entire widget is being rebuilt every time that you press the floating action button. So this is what that counter object looks like. Again, we're going to dig into the specifics of the syntax that you're seeing here, but with a few annotations and some boilerplate at the top, we're basically defining a model that we can react to. And when I say react to, for example, the observer on the right side is re-rendering whenever the value changes that it's using. So let's kind of break down Mobx into and kind of explain how these things work and the concepts going on here. So this image is straight from the mobx.dart README on GitHub. And this is kind of the philosophy with how to manage state here is your state is defined as observables, which is just a fancy term to means that you can react to them changing. Observables, when they change, they notify any reactions that you have. So you could have a reaction that listens to the observables changing and then does something. So for example, that observer widget that we show is a good example. It listens to the observers changing and it re-renders UI. Now, that reactions don't just need to be UI. You can also use reactions to run other code that isn't a user interface. And then actions are what mutate the state of observables. So it's like increment was the action in the previous example, and the value of the counter was the observable. So let's take a look at each of these in detail so you guys are clear on what these are. So let's say, for example, if I was writing like a contacts application and I had a contact object that I wanted to be reactive, here'd be an example of that. So I have my contact base, which is a store. A store is just a Mobx terminology for basically the class that holds your state. So here, first name and last name are observable. So all that means, again, is that they're fancy properties that other code can react to them changing. There's also a special type of observable called a computed observable. A computed observable is derived from other observables. So basically here I want full name, and instead of having to manually update full name every time first name and last name changes, I turn it into a getter and I mark it as computed. And anytime first name or last name changes, computed will automatically update itself on any dependent observables. So if you update last name, it'll update the full name. If you update first name, it'll also update the full name. again, this is really important because you don't want to duplicate logic. And also you don't want to really do string concatenation in your UI. So it's a very clean way of reacting to other things in your store and then offering up a derived value. So next are actions. So action, all an action is again a fancy name for a function that changes state. So here, let's say I'm getting my contact information from a backend. So I'm making an HTTP call, I'm awaiting it. So this works with asynchronous methods. And when I get a result, I'm setting first name and I'm setting last name. So by the time that this function finishes, right as it finishes, first name is updated, last name is updated. Anybody who's listening to first name or last name is getting notified. And my full name is also getting updated for me for free without doing anything special. And that is also notifying its changes to the UI or anybody else who's listening. So you get a reactive kind of view model here without really doing much, just by putting 2 lines of boilerplate at the top, which Mobx requires for how it works, and then annotating a few things with observable, computed, and action. So reactions is the other piece that you didn't get to see before, and it's kind of like observables. It's code that you want to run on when something changes. So when my contact base is created, I could set up a reaction that listens to full name, and whenever full name changes, I want to log it. Let's say I'm logging it to my backend. Let's say I'm logging it to Sentry. Let's say I'm logging it to the console. But anytime full name gets changed, my log name update function is going to get called. And because of how full name, again, is computed, if I update first name or last name, full name will get updated, so full name will get logged. A very clean way to run some arbitrary code when anything that you care about gets updated. And this can get updated from a lot of different places, and you won't have to duplicate your log name update code. And you don't have to create it, use like a private variable with a setter and then put a bunch of code in the setter. This is much cleaner than that. And then, which we saw in the first example, observers, which are in bold here in the UI. So observers are builder widgets. They automatically track observables that are being used and then re-render whenever they change. So in the example here, we have a row that displays the first name and last name. And then below that, in it, we have the full name being displayed. So again, if I change the first name or last name, very efficiently, the observers are re-rendering only their children. The scaffold isn't getting re-rendered here. If I had an app bar, that wouldn't be getting re-rendered. And if I had more code below, like buttons or a carousel, none of that would be re-rendered. So it kind of prevents you from having to break down your widgets into a lot of smaller widgets just for performance benefits. Now you can break them down when you choose to. And I think that flexibility is important instead of it being forced upon you. So just jumping back to the first example, again, this is the exact same code, just as a refresher for what's going on here. So API calls, data manipulation, business logic, UI, a UI controller at the top, and set state. So just as a refresher to what this code looks like. The homepage state, sorry. So, sorry, I got confused there. So after we change our code base to use Mobx and to use view models, other than the build method, this is the only UI related code in that same file. That's why I was so confused. It was such a reduction in lines. All that you have here now is a reference to your view model, and you still need that page controller from before. Everything, all the API calls, all the data manipulation, the model handling, all of that is somewhere else because it's not a UI concern, right? These are the things that are a UI concern. A reference to your view model, UI controllers like a page controller, and then your build method, which I'm not showing in this example. So if we look at what's in the view model, it's the opposite. There's no UI considerations here, and it's all code for interacting with my data. So we can still see that I have my API class that I'm using. I've set up that timer that was re-requesting API data every few seconds. That's not in my UI anymore. It's somewhere else. The data that I'm caching, all this stuff is now in a clean place. There's a lot of different benefits for this, and I think some of them are obvious, some of them might not be. Again, separations of concerns and clean architecture, but separately from that, think about if you had a very complex screen and you wanted more than one developer to work on it, right? If you agreed on a common interface, one of you could work on the view model, one of you could work on the UI. As long as you understand what data that you're going to interact with, you can pretty much work independently. Also testing, right? Before, if I wanted to test my logic and I wanted to test my UI, I would have had to do all of that in a widget test, right? Kind of forcing me to test the two together. If I wanted to, I could test the home view model now separately from the home page, and I can have pure business logic related tests without worrying about UI. And I could have my UI test as a completely separate test, because again, UI and business logic are separate concepts. And not to mention that, just like before, this is more efficient because only the part of the UI that's listening to my observer, my invitations list here, my upcoming work list here, and my has invitations list here is being re-rendered. A lot of moving the code to this as well makes you think about how you write UI code a little bit differently. In my previous build method, which I know you guys didn't get to take a look at, I had a check for should I render a certain portion of UI, and I was checking if my invitations list was empty. So instead of doing that check in the UI, I can do it in my view model, and now my UI just has to consume a simple Boolean. Instead of checking if the list is empty, I can have a nice clean has invitations Boolean, right? Which clearly defines what I'm asking for and dumbs down the UI as much as possible. And it's simple. I don't have to worry about managing that has invitations Boolean and making sure it's up to date because it's automatically up to date. In my previous example, I probably wouldn't introduce a Boolean like that because I'd be worrying about it getting out of sync with my list maybe if I start modifying that list from another place in code. But because this is driven from existing observables, it's derived, I don't have to worry about it being up to date. Other benefits, so I've kind of hit some of these to death. Separation of concerns, decoupling business logic from UI, clean reactive code leveraging Mobx, performance benefits by avoiding set state and stateful widgets, and Mvvm lets you test the view model independently of the UI. I've been using Mvvm development as an architecture pattern for many, many years, and I think it's even better in Flutter than it was in Xamarin. And yeah, I've been absolutely loving it. And since we kind of landed on Mvvm as an approach with Flutter, we really haven't looked back. Even if you compare it to some of the other popular state management libraries out there, like Provider, I still feel like it couples your UI code with your non-UI code a little bit too much. People like to say everything in Flutter is a widget. And I agree with you, and I think that aspect is great, but maybe there's some times where you should create that layer of separation and think about code versus layout. And yeah, that's it for me. Any questions I can answer for you guys?
So my biggest observation is that it feels very analogous to what Block and Stream Builder is doing. Like, do you have any opinions on Mobx versus that?
So that's a really good point, and I probably should have brought that up. So I actually used Block and Stream Builders before I used Mobx, and for me, it takes a lot more code to write Stream Builders. You have to set up streams, you have to set up syncs, you have to dispose of those streams, you have to dispose of those syncs, and also the builders. So when you use a stream builder, or if you use like a block builder, those are typically pointing at one single piece of data to react to. So in this example, let's say if I was using block, I would probably have a stream builder or a block builder for first name, and I would probably have one for last name. So I would be adding nesting here just to react to both of them. Whereas the way that Mobx works is it tracks the usages of the properties that are being accessed and then re-renders. So in my opinion, Mobx is less code, and you can merge streams, absolutely true, but you have to, right? Again, and then it depends on if you're using just like block as a pattern or the block library. But even if you're merging streams from a pure stream perspective, then you kind of have to create a model to maybe represent that stream. And here it's very simple. You just wrap it with an observer, and you re-render what the children is. And also, kind of what I was saying in here is there's nothing to set up. I'm using regular types, right? I'm not using a stream. I'm not using a block stream. I'm not using some type that this library told me to use. I'm using regular types, which is just a regular list, and I'm using my job model, which I defined. I really like block, and I like streams a lot. I just feel like I can do more with less code with Mobx. But at the heart of it, I feel like they're very similar, and they're both trying to solve the same problem.
Thank you.
Hey Jason, this is Mani. So the latest release of Block have removed stream and sync, and we can remove a lot of code. So
that's great to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, if block is working for you, and if those newer releases of the block library are reducing the code enough that you're happy, there's no reason to change. You can do Mvvm development with streams, and I'm sure, very efficiently with the block library. I've been very happy with Mobx, and I'm not sure myself on how they would handle, certain things here, but I really find that the annotation kind of based approach is really clean and stops the state management library that you're using from taking over kind of your code base in a way. But 100%, if you're using block and it's working for you, there's no big reason to change if what you see here doesn't excite you.
Jason, do you ever break down the business logic layer into any further layers than just the view model?
Yes. So yes, it's not what I was planning on talking about today, but absolutely. So I have a concept in the apps that I work on where view models are the state management and the reactive object for your page level widgets. Or your widgets in general. But in how I build apps, I typically so view models are local state, right? They're state specifically to a piece of UI, or they're state specifically to a page. So I use a concept of it's basically a view model in terms of how it's reactive, but there's no view, whereas you have a manager, let's say a user manager, an authentication manager, and it also uses Mobx to offer other view models or other pieces of code to react to it. So in an app I'm working on right now, I have an observable auth state from my auth manager. And whenever the user logs in or logs out, it updates that authentication state. And then I have some navigation code that listens to that and will navigate you into the app or back to the login screen. So if your token expires or something, you automatically get set back to the login page without the manager specifically having to use the navigator. The manager just offers up its authentication state, and then some other piece of code that listens to the authentication state knows that I have to send the user this way or have to send the user that way. So I think global state is one piece not covered here today. Another piece that I covered in my apps, and again, these terminologies, manager, and I'm going to use services for the next one. The terminology doesn't matter. It's just kind of how you want to approach it. But I call services anything that is external that I don't have control over. So view models and managers, you have full control over them. This is your code that you own. But if you interact with, let's say, location services, shared preferences, any Bluetooth, any other device features. An API is a great one. And you can see that my marketplace API here at the top of the screen ends in service. And that's, again, part of this pattern is I use services to create a Dart interface between my code and the third party or dependent code. And doing that allows you to mock them easily. If you use shared preferences in your view model directly, it can be difficult to mock, although shared preferences does provide you a mechanism to putting in mock values. That doesn't mean that every plugin is going to do that. So I put shared preferences access behind a shared preferences service that I own the interface of and that I can mock. I can inject mocks into my tests. And that way, it's kind of one of my old bosses used to say, choose your own destiny, right? If you're using the plugins directly, you're at the whim of their interface and you're at the whim of whatever testing support they give you or whatever mocks they give you. But if you use your own interface that you create and then in that class, you use shared preferences or you use that plugin, it allows you control of that interface and allows you to create mocks of it very easily.
There speaks the voice of experience. That is so true. It does sound like you've been influenced by Thomas Burkhart's ideas about RX VMS.
I'm familiar with him, and I have read his RX VMS, and I was a fan of it, and I think I may have taken the manager term from there. But yeah, I like some of his work, and I think his kind of ideas on state management I think are along the right lines for sure. I wasn't planning on showing this. Maybe I could show you guys. So I have, since we're getting a lot of interest. So I have this kind of document that I've been creating, and I'm not sure if I'm sharing the right thing. Is it on GitHub? Yeah, okay. So this is basically what I've talked about today, plus some things outside of Mvvm that I've been documenting is kind of like a brain dump on how I approach Flutter architecture. And so everything that I've said today in maybe less words is here. And there's also some thoughts on global state management and more deeper thoughts on services. So I'll send this around. Feel free to look at this if you're really interested in the stuff that I've been talking about. I will say it's not complete. There's a few sections that just say to do. But I do hope to be cleaning it up over the next little while. There's a small example app that implements some of these concepts, and so you can feel free to take a look at that. But I still have more work to do. But the idea for this repo is it can be kind of like a guide for implementing, implementing the approach that I've been speaking about today in Flutter. Other questions? Alrighty, perfect. So I think for the rest of the meetup, there's two things that we wanted to talk about, depending on how much time we have and how much people stick around. But that's the end of the talks. So next, I think we wanted to see if anybody was interested in kind of introducing themselves a little bit more and talking about maybe where they work or any projects that they have ongoing with Flutter, any interesting libraries that they've been working on. So it's free game. If anybody would like to speak up, please do.
One issue that I came across recently, I'll just share my screen here. Saw a bug so this was reported 2 years ago, where animated crossfade it has two children, and for some reason, if one is visible and you click, let's say second child here is visible, and first child here has to unpressed. If second child is visible and you click on it, it works as expected. Hold on, sorry, I got my wires crossed here. If first child is visible, no, if first child is invisible, sorry, then there should be nothing to press. But if second child is visible and you click it, then the first one might still react to you. My team found a workaround for it that we kind of made our own animated crossfade with sort of a backstop using an app store pointer here. So each child has a backstop of a app store pointer. That way, the events wouldn't pass to the unseen child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. I think I actually ran into this at some point. I use animated crossfade a lot, and there's definitely a few things about it that that bother me. I think that's a good example. And another one is the way the constraints work on like the invisible child can sometimes mean that when that child isn't being rendered, that it has like infinite width or infinite height. So yeah, I've had some frustrations with animated crossfade, but that's a good one. Anything else that people are interested in sharing? Projects that they're working on? Maybe a company in Toronto that's doing Flutter development that we don't know about. Alvin, what about tribal scale? Like, what are you guys doing with Flutter?
Currently, we're working with one of the major chain restaurants. They're rewriting their app using Flutter, so we're helping them with that.
Very cool.
It's a complete rewrite, Android, iOS using Flutter.
Wow, that's great. A few things that and they are doing an amazing job. That's good to hear. A few things that I wanted to call out or see if anybody had any thoughts on. So has anybody played around with the non-nullable by default preview that the Dart and Flutter team have kind of put out? For those not familiar, like Dart, like most languages, allows you to set variables to null, whether you want to or not. And they're working on some non-nullable by default code, which allows you to create types that will only be nullable if you want them to be. And so, your whole code base could be non-nullable by default and hopefully help you kind of, avoid null reference errors and the like. So I'm just curious if anybody has played around with the preview SDK yet. Okay. So also, I'll just name a bunch of these discussion ideas. You guys can just throw out if you have anything. So if you have any favorite YouTube channels that you follow for Flutter, we'd love to hear them. What technology you guys are using on the back end to power your Flutter apps would be super interesting. How you deal with private pub dependencies is something that we're interested in. And if anybody's done AR in Flutter. So if any of those things tickled you in any way, I'd love to hear from you. What about you, Alvin? Do you guys have any private like pub libraries that you've been using for your clients?
Right now, we don't. We
Okay.
don't have the power to open source anything at this time. That might change in the future.
Any private pub dependencies? So like pub libraries that you don't want to be open source.
I haven't explored into that area yet.
Okay.
That's very interesting.
So we have created a private pub dependency, which is Mopub. So currently Mopub doesn't support Flutter side. It only have Android and iOS SDK. So we just created a bridge and made it as a private dependency.
Okay, great. And how are you referencing that? Are you using like a path dependency or using like a Git dependency?
It's using a Git dependency.
A Git dependency, is that working well for you?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, great. Good to hear. Yeah, I've been doing the Filled Stacks YouTube channel for Flutter. I think that's a really good one. Yeah, definitely. If you guys are looking for some Flutter YouTubers, I think that's a great one. Yeah, I've been using Git dependencies as well for my private pub stuff, but I definitely find some tooling issues. Pub doesn't seem to like the Git dependencies that much, and sometimes you run into some authentication issues depending on how you have your Git client set up. But yeah, good to know that someone else is having good experience with it. What about backend technology? What are you guys using to power the backend of your app?
For us at TribalScale, we're using your typical REST API to talk with our clients' existing servers.
Oh, okay. Well, what are you building that REST API with?
Well, they already have one, but we're using retrofit on our side.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
I know I've done a lot of C# development myself, as you probably heard with the Xamarin comment. So I've done a lot of .NET Core backends for my Flutter apps for REST and GraphQL, and it has worked decently. Is anybody else doing GraphQL with Flutter? No. There was a really cool library that I found called Artemis. Let me share the link here.
Yes, Jason.
And
I GraphQL. Sorry. To
use GraphQL?
yeah, integrate a Shopify.
Great.
Yeah.
And did you use any library to help you do that?
GraphQL library only.
The GraphQL Dart library? Great. There is this library, Artemis. And so what I like about this, I sent the link around, is that it lets you put in your code base a GraphQL schema file, and it lets you put in your queries as strings, and then it generates you type-safe code to interact with GraphQL. So if you write a query that has like 2 fields on one property on one model and like 2 fields on another, and you have that query, it'll generate you a specific model that represents that query. So when you're interacting with it, you get full IntelliSense, and it only shows the fields that you would get from that query. And it makes it so you never have a mismatch of your Dart models to your GraphQL queries. So I've found this library to be super, super interesting and very helpful for working with GraphQL.
So Jason, does Artemis have the same issues that Apollo does in terms of a fragment used in 2 different places will generate 2 separate classes?
That's a really, really good question. I haven't used fragments with it myself, so I can't answer.
No, understood. It's a detailed thing.
Yeah, no, that definitely sounds like an interesting problem. So I'm not sure. I know that they've been working on, like, it's had a decent amount of active development. I know they started like a V6 recently with a bunch of changes, which I haven't looked into. I've just been using their stable release, but yeah, I would definitely give it a try if you're working with GraphQL.
I'm curious what you like to use with REST, with RESTful APIs on the Flutter side.
Yeah, okay, great question. So I actually just have like a file that's like maybe 60 lines, and it's just a few utility functions for interacting with REST using the standard HTTP built into Dart. So I'm not using DO, I'm not using Chopper or like any of the fancy HTTP libraries. I'm just using HTTP with like some helper functions.
Is anybody using anything that derives classes from OpenAPI specs?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Because I've certainly seen REST APIs spun up based on Swagger.
Yeah, no,
I believe there is a Swagger Dart library, but I haven't checked it out.
That's a good one. I haven't checked that out either. I think generating like an API interface from a Swagger file or from an Open API thing would be really, really cool. Somebody asked in the chat if I could give them a link to that file. I think I can make that happen. Give me a moment. Robert, you seem to know your stuff. What are you building with Flutter?
Nothing much at the moment. I'm still studying. I tend to deep dive and then build things, but I've got in mind to actually build a quiz app based on the gift file format that is used by Moodle, which is a learning management system.
Very cool.
Well, I found some GIF files lying around on something I wanted to learn, so I figured I'd better build myself something to quiz myself with it, because installing Moodle is a bit much.
So I shared a link in the chat for the kind of API utilities file that I've used in a few projects. So all it is really is like a response class that wraps this wraps the data that you get back with a generic type, and gives you the status code and a few utilities. So basically, you can do get of a certain type, give it the URL, give it a function that returns the JSON into the type, which if you're using JSON serializable is obviously given to you for free. And then it returns the data to you. And so you can check like is success. It does the try catch for you, so you don't have to do the try catch in other places, but it properly reports an error, so it's properly handled. And I find that this utility mixed with like a very simple like API class that kind of makes these calls has been helpful for really simple API interaction. So one Matthew in the chat asked if anybody has a good abstract data type solutions for Dart, something that can be used like sealed classes in Kotlin or enums in Swift. I know that exists some of these. So I'm happy to talk about two things that I've been looking into. So I've been looking into basically using immutable classes just by marking the class as immutable and all the fields as final. And then I use copy with a copy with code generator just to generate a copy with function. And that has been pretty solid for me. I'm going to look up in case I can find that library. Here is the copy with library. I put it in the chat if anybody interested in that. Yeah, so question about the code generation in Mobx. So I'm happy to bring it back up here. Want to make sure everybody fully understood. So if I go to the counter example, so there was a question kind of about how the code generation works in Mobx. So the way it works is the generated code that Mobx is making is basically adding code in the getter and setter for your observables, so it can track that they were used. And how it does that is you create an abstract class, and ideally you make it private so that you don't accidentally use it. And then the real class that you're actually going to use in your UI is this one here, and you make it equal. I know the syntax is a little bit weird. You make it equal your private class that you defined, and then the $_ class. So that class it's a mix-in that's generated by Mobx. So yeah, you're 100% right. Basically, you can just copy these top two lines and then replace counter with whatever you want it to be in these 4 places, and then generate the code, and it will be good to go. So I hopefully that answers the question for you. Yeah, one thing that kind of frustrates me, but I understand it, is how much code generation is required in a Flutter dev environment because of the lack of reflection. And I know the lack of reflection is great from like a performance standpoint and like tree shaking standpoint. But it's a little bit annoying that you have to constantly set up code generation and run it just to get basic things like JSON serialization. But it's unfortunately just the state that we're in.
Yeah, to turn back briefly to sealed classes, I read an article that was referenced on LinkedIn not long ago, and it was really annoying because all it did was say, yeah, we need that. And the next article will tell you how to do it. Well, I just looked for that article. I'm not going to link to it because it was just really frustrating to have all this big wind up with that letdown. But there was another article that I just noticed, which seems to use freezed as a way of getting a kind of pseudo sealed class. I just glanced at it quickly, so your mileage may vary.
Yeah, no, Freeze looks really cool, and I had seen it on Twitter before, and it definitely seems like it accomplishes some of the same, concepts of a sealed class. There's a little bit of strange, kind of like with Mobx, you have the code generation in there and a little bit of strange syntax to get used to, but definitely if you're looking for some immutable data models and sealed classes, it's probably the closest that you can get.
Speaking of immutables and going beyond that to pure functional, is anybody using a more pure functional style? And any libraries that you find particularly support that?
So if nobody has any other comments, I have two thoughts on that. One is I actually think that the Mobx and view model stuff allows you to be more functional in your UI layer because you don't have to break it down to widgets as much, because you don't have to worry about full page rebuilds, because you can use the observer for smaller updates. So unfortunately, like everything from your view model end onwards is still kind of class focused, but your UI layer can be much more functional.
Yeah, I agree, the reactive model and the functional model are definitely very well in sync.
There's another library that I just linked. So by the same person who worked on Freeze, so functional widget, it basically allows you to write widgets as functions and then code gen them into stateless widgets to cut down on boilerplate, but keep the performance characteristics of using stateful widgets over functions.
Thanks. That'll be interesting to look at. And just to give you a little more background on me, I've been doing Android development for the last 5 years at TripAdvisor until their recent layoffs, and gave me the opportunity to go explore Flutter more, which has been a great deal of fun.
Awesome. Glad to hear it.
The other thing I'll evangelize to anybody who will listen is accessibility. Flutter has it reasonably well handled by default. You just need to be aware of the semantics widget. But that's become a huge big thing down here I'm from Boston, by the way, I should have explained that. Down here in the US because of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Up there you guys have different legislation, but the US being litigious and all, we're getting a lot of lawsuits about this. So it's not a small thing.
Yeah, very important. Although the company that I work for is Canadian, we have products that are served in the US, and I know, especially in our web team, the accessibility is on the top of everybody's mind, and you definitely should be aware of the requirements in the law before you do too much without it.
Well, the good news is, at least web-wise, everybody's pretty much agreed on the W3C web content accessibility guidelines, 2.0, 2.1. So if you're in accord with those, you're in pretty good shape.
I see. Alrighty. Well, I think we're gonna kind of wind down for today. Is there any other comments anybody wanted to share? Any libraries that you really love using, or any last questions that popped into your head? Alrighty. Well, please, thank you all for attending and staying this long. It was a pleasure to be able to, do the first Flutter Toronto meetup. I hope to do a lot more. If you have any feedback, feel free to reach out to me on Meetup. Send me the feedback, and I'll do my best to incorporate it for our next meetup. And I really hope that within the next few months that we can do an in-person meetup as well. In Toronto, because I think that'd be really fun. But of course, for our online and more remote people, we'll do either recording or maybe some live streaming as well, which I think would be a lot of fun.
If anyone's interested in being a speaker, please reach out to Jason or myself.
Yes, please. We'd love to have more speakers. And even if you don't think that your topic is, very interesting, I think that, there's so much out there, even what we talked about today in the second half of the meetup with, immutable data, sealed stuff, code generation, like there's so much to talk about. So yeah, if you're comfortable, please pick something and we're happy to have you next time.
Thanks, Alvin. Thanks, Jason. One thing it might be worth mentioning is starting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Pacific time, Flutter Day from Google.
Yes, thank you for calling that out. I had heard about that, but I forgot about it. So yes, there's going to be a lot of live streams. I think a lot of interesting educational content and maybe some announcements. So definitely, I would pay attention to that tomorrow. Alrighty. Well, thanks everybody. See you next time.
Have fun.